Okay, so now that you have all learned what the extemporaneous style of speaking is, today you're going to learn how to design speeches for the extemporaneous style of speaking. The format we use for a speech is not all that different from the basic format for learning how to write an essay for an English class. What both have in common is that they are put into place to demystify the assignment. How many of you have sat down to write an essay with the same feeling as looking at a huge mountain to climb? With an outline for an essay, you give yourself an attainable goal to reach every step of the way: introduction, topic paragraphs, and conclusion. The same is true for the basic format for a speech. It is designed to break things down for you and make your goals attainable. So here is the basic format. You can see that it's done in a very specific way. So pay attention, because this is the format we're going to be using for the whole semester. The first thing I want you to notice is the 3 Roman numerals as the headers. And they are known as the main parts: the introduction, the discussion, and the conclusion. And we always use Roman numerals. Again, you can see that this is very similar to the essay, except for part 2, which is called the discussion. In an essay, we would call this the main body, but since this is a speech class, well, we call that a discussion. We start the speech with the introduction. The introduction consists of 2 parts: the attention getter and the preview. In a speech, it is important to make a good impression right at the start. Your goal for the introduction is not only to get the audience's attention, but also let them know what you will be talking about. Thus, we start with the attention getter. The criteria for an attention getter is simple. It must be interesting to the audience. So what would be an interesting way to start a speech? One way would be to make a strong statement to get our attention. The other thing would be to ask an interesting question, a question that engages us. And finally, a startling statistic or interesting fact. For example, I've made up a sample outline for a demonstration speech that is up on Blackboard that you can all download and look at. Use it to refer to when making your own outlines. And this demonstration speech is how to make pancakes. My attention getter is really 2 parts here. First, I start with a question. Does anyone here know how to make pancakes from scratch? Or do you just go right to the mix? If you do, you're not alone. According to Statistia.com, over 207 million Americans bought pancake or waffle mix in 2019. So I started off with a question, forced an engagement, and then I gave you an interesting statistic: 207 million Americans. Now, what's not a good attention getter? Well, if you get up there and you say, "How you doing?" that really doesn't engage us. If you get up and you say, "Okay, well, my speech is about," once again, you've just gone right to the preview. You haven't engaged us. And that is your purpose. If you have an engaged audience, you are now ready to give them a preview. Important. Again, the main parts of the speech are Roman numerals always. Your attention getter should lead into your preview. A preview is the equivalent of a thesis statement. It tells your audience what your speech is about. The parts of the section are capital letters, and they stay capital letters for the introduction and the discussion and the conclusion. Notice that I've indented to the right. You always indent to the right, and the reason for that is because we read from left to right, and thus it is easy to follow. The discussion, the main body of your speech, is about 80% of your speech. Now that you've let everyone know what the speech is about, what you want to do is you want to arrange your main points together. You want to arrange them logically, and you want to support with data. So I have main points here, capital A, capital B, and capital C. And the question is how do I arrange them in a logical order? Getting back to my example about how to make pancakes, I could use 3 main points. A, ingredients, B, preparation, and C, cooking. So, you can see if I were to use for A, ingredients, I have indented to the right and I have numbers 1, 2, and 3. Remember, we do not want to write full sentences because we do not want to read a speech. So we number here so we can break it down. In this case, I would probably say, okay, the ingredients are wet ingredients, and I would list them, and then dry ingredients, and I would list them, and then I would list what the equipment would be, like an electric griddle. The point is that I indent to the right using numbers when I need to use subheaders. You don't always have to do it, but it certainly helps. We always want to support our points with data. We always want to arrange them logically, but we want to support with data. And in speech class, data is anything that helps your speech. So in this case, it would be ingredients. Now you can see for B, I have arranged logically, and then I have, in this case for the speech, it would be preparation. So imagine there's a preparation there, and then I would do cooking, and it would be A, combined wet ingredients, and B, combined dry ingredients, and then 2 would be combine all and let them sit. The point I'm making here is that you might have a subheader to your subheader. And that's where you keep indenting to the right and use A and B. The point is not to stress you out, quite the opposite. The point of the basic format is to get you to write in bullet points and to always separate things out so you can always find your spot easily. Now that you're done with the discussion part, you might think, well, I'm done with the speech. But you're not. This brings you to the conclusion. Like an essay, the conclusion is like the introduction, only upside down. And this is where you want to wrap up your speech, and at the same time, this is where most people often make mistakes. So I want you to listen carefully here. Finish strong. Generally what happens is that people get through their discussion and they start to relax and they say, I'm going to be all done. And so they just whip through this, but you want to slow down. And you can see that the conclusion is the introduction upside down. You have a preview for B in the introduction, but in the conclusion, you have what's called a review. The review is like the preview, only you want to touch upon the important parts of your speech. For the pancake speech, it might be a reminder to mix the dry and wet ingredients separately and to remember that the way to check whether or not the griddle is ready to cook on is to sprinkle water on it and see if it bubbles up. The point is that you don't have to review the whole speech. You just want to have a couple of things that you want your audience to remember. And just as the introduction has an attention getter that you start with, you end with a memorable statement. And you want to engage the audience. A memorable statement is what you want your audience to think about when your speech is over. And so a memorable statement here might be, Now that you know that making pancakes from scratch are a lot easier, you won't have to get mixed, you'll be a real cook, or something like that. You can finish on a light note. But the point is that you always want to finish with a memorable statement, depending on the gravity of the speech. One of the best things I ever heard in a speech was a woman who did a demonstration speech, and she was making cookies, and she talked about her grandmother at her attention getter. And she said that when she grew up, her grandmother taught us how to make these Polish cookies from the old country. And so she would stand by her grandmother for years and make cookies. She said that in the previous year she had lost her grandmother and she missed her very much. And so this is what she did to make herself feel better. She made these cookies, and she instantly got the class's attention because she talked about her grandmother. When she got to the memorable statement, she said, "So if you've lost someone you've loved and you're feeling sad, do something that reminds you of them, and I guarantee you'll be happier." So she did a wonderful job of combining this. This is your challenge for the speech. You want to combine all of this. In conclusion to this presentation, I want to tell you that you will all be required to make a rough outline for every speech and then send it to me. And I am going to go over your outlines, and hopefully my notes and the example that you have online will demystify this whole process for you. I know that it can be a little confusing at first, but I think eventually you'll learn to appreciate that the basic format is a great way to give a speech.